most, as I understand, the threshold cases, or the most expansive cases, are the ones that have been brought in New Jersey and in Texas. And if you look in the language, the New Jersey Supreme Court declared, as I believe under their constitution, under the federal constitution, education or educational assessments for education based upon the value of the property in the community to be unconstitutional. Doesn't equally protect students in Newark as to students in Upper Saddle Ridge. You know, they don't get the same education. They don't have the same schools. Our bill, like I said, we do not believe that this is the final product. We will keep expanding our bill so that we get more issues, more topics covered. Well, I do mind. I'm not leaving.
I think the perspective Dwayne gave us today is very important in terms of the Senator Patterson's bill. I think we all agree that we can have an effect in making change in this country and in this state, and Dwayne is an example of that by helping to author this bill. I wanted to take a minute just to note the importance of the people here. I know that I see Ariella Schreiber here from the Layman's Society, and I really am glad to see you here. We did not have today speakers speaking on violence or discrimination against Jews, violence or discrimination against Puerto Ricans, or violence or discrimination against other ethnic groups. The point of that is just that the resources we had to work with were very limited. We are trying to deal with a very broad topic here, and if you saw any leaflets for something like the International Law Day, you saw that they had about 6 panels, all in different rooms. The whole building was closed down so that anybody who came there would go anywhere they wanted to, and all you see was International Law Day. We have, truly, I look around and I see real down-to-earth people, and people that I really respect for coming by and to give yourselves some credit for standing up or sitting down for a while for something that you think should be addressed. I know that Ariella was, she came up to me about 4 months ago, feels like 4 months ago, 2 months ago, and came up to me before evidence class and said, Nick, there's this great symposium up a few blocks away on black-Jewish relations. You know, you should know about it. I said, thanks, Ariella, you know, it's really nice. And I said, you know, I wish I'd known about it. I would have, you know, helped you publicize it. So Ariella gets a little piece of chalk, and she comes up to the board and writes it on the board. And unfortunately, we have an absent-minded professor for evidence, who I won't name, and he went up and put his little scribbly scrabbles all over it, but it didn't matter, because the point was made, and the connection was made, and it doesn't really matter in the long run whether he erased that, or whether we had enough money to do this, or whether, you know, I was the only person running to radio stations and other universities to get people here. What matters is that the people who are here are committed to it and believe that we can make a change, and it doesn't take that many people to do it. In that frame of mind, I want to introduce the next speaker on our agenda, who has been for the last 10 years of my life a mentor, and truly a person who gives me, and I believe will give you, some insight in the way to bridge yourself from one mindset to another I shouldn't say another mindset, but a freer mindset. And it sounds like I'm getting into spirituality here, but maybe there's nothing wrong with that in a school called Yeshiva University. His name is Richard Oppenheimer, and he holds the title of President of the Professional Association of Daycare Directors of New York City. That doesn't tell as much as the place where he works, which is a forgotten place, like many places where people of darker skin live, which is Bushwick and Williamsburg, Brooklyn. And Richard has committed himself to working in that community on the issue of daycare. And he has been a part of that community and truly is an institution and a symbol for the rest of us in terms of how to break through the walls that the society puts up between us, whether it be between Jew and non-Jew, Hispanic and non-Hispanic, down the line. We should take inspiration from his courage in taking his own family struggle and applying it to a real-life experience. And I want to just thank Richard very much for taking the whole day to be here with us. And if you sit back, you're in for a real treat and a real inspiration. Richard?
I feel like I'm at my own funeral. I kind of feel like Huckleberry Finn when they landed from the island and they made it into the... just in time to hear the eulogy. Nick, I don't even know what to say to that, except that I'm going to begin with a poem. Part of dealing with bias is dealing with psychology, the psychology of this country. And somewhere around 1970, I'm 42 years old, so I don't know if that helps you any. I started to write poetry, and somewhere in the mid-70s, I decided to write a poem about the American myth, which is a rural myth, and I wanted to deal with that because most of the people in this country live in an urban environment. And the American myth, of course, is the cowboy myth. And so the character in this poem is female. And I took everything that was inside myself, everything that I had gone through up until that point, and this is it. Now, one more thing, there's a reference to some... it's very important that people assimilate everything around them. And what to learn about bias isn't just in a law school or isn't just in a law, it's also in film, it's in music, it's in everything. There's a reference to 400 Blows here, and that's a film by Francois Truffaut, who was part of the French New Wave in the early 60s, which dealt with a young person who ended up in reform school, and the film ends with the first free shot ever. This kid has run away, everybody's on his tail, and he ends up on the beach, and he's on the water, and there's no place left for him to go, because if he goes into the water, he drowns. That's the free shot. That's the end of the film. This is the story of a child without a home, orphaned early and left to roam, grew up strong with eyes that see, she's looked up to in her community. I'm not saying she's a modern-day El Cid. I'm just saying she's the ghetto kid. She took more than 400 blows and still was prancing on her toes, riding on the back of buses and trains. It took her a while to use her brain. Turned off by false preachers of the golden rule, she somehow managed to stay in school. 10% in, 90% out. She sent forth a silent shout. Though she got the 3rd degree, she somehow made it through the university. And though the streets became her home, it was there she found her inner dome. Busting out of ball and chain, she's out there dancing in the rain. I'm not saying she's a modern-day El Cid. I'm just saying she's the ghetto kid. I'm forcing myself, because of the circumstances, to relive parts of my life that you just assimilate and you just ride through like a train. And I'm going back to the beginning. My family fled bias in its most extreme form, and I dedicated my life to dealing with this type of hate. I didn't realize how difficult this is. It's like walking up a down escalator, and the view from the escalator has gone from partly cloudy, which looks bright when wearing rose-colored glasses, to a downpour, but I still feel the sun shining inside myself, and my dream alive to pass on to others, and the hope that the election of Mayor Dinkins represents to me, and the miracle of the freeing of Nelson Mandela, that a fabric of respect and understanding, the sense of a common dream, the American dream, can be woven into the mosaic of pluralism we call New York City. Beyond that, the land between the oceans, the Jeffersonian dream of an ongoing American revolution. Beyond that, the Wilsonian and Rooseveltian dream of United Nations. This century has witnessed the worst form of human bias and evil that has occurred in human history. Industrialized genocide. In 1934, my father and his father spent a night in the woods in Germany because a pogrom was beginning in their hometown. My father, having an aunt in this country, was able to receive an affidavit and emigrated to the U.S. in 1935. He got his parents out in 1936. My mother's father, a quiet visionary, got an affidavit for my mother in 1936 through an uncle in this country. And she got her sisters and parents out in 1937. And this is something I'm still trying to figure out. I'm still trying to understand this. Trying to comprehend this as a child, I got turned on to what the late Paul Cowan called, something referred to earlier in this morning, the secular messianism that sprang out of Brown versus Board of Ed, the American Civil Rights Movement that would end American apartheid, and felt the wind of the message, all people created equal, life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, and the excitement, the thrill of the Bill of Rights, a living constitution, a land of laws. But I also had a rude awakening. There was a frightening, irrational undercurrent to this land of hope. You first bump into it when you read about the Three-Fifths Compromise, the incredulous Dred Scott decision, the denial of humanity that slavery represents, the U.S. being almost the last Western nation to end slavery, the horror of Plessy versus Ferguson. But Brown versus Board of Ed and the Warren Court seemed to be the wind blowing the U.S. to a place of true human leadership. A new frontier was opening to the youth of this nation, and hope sprang from within, not unlike what is now occurring in Eastern Europe and South Africa. But of course, in Eastern Europe, we now see Romanians clubbing Hungarians. I saw law and political activism as the road before me. I lived in a nation where change occurs by the ballot, not the bullet, but soon learned the sad truth. The hatred that disrupted other societies also disrupts our own. The president who represented vision and individual activism for the binding of our nation and beyond was gunned down in his youth. He had been able to inspire and excite young people beyond anything you have seen in films of what's called Beatlemania, which followed his death. Soon bullets were flying everywhere, and the dreamers were laid to waste, and the FBI and the CIA were dancing on the American Constitution. I was a political science major at Hunter College, but I was learning the truth about this country in my English, theater, film, and art classes, my music, my poetry, and the streets. At that time, I just want to pause for a second. I added a note here that at that particular time, I'm getting to 1968, I was a part of the struggle inside of Hunter College through a strike and through all means possible for Black and Puerto Rican Studies Department. And we won. In a year of great pain and suffering, we won on that. And also in 1968, there was an incredible teachers' strike that took place. And students at Hunter College decided that we are not part of a separate ivory tower. We are part of our own community. And we wanted to set up freedom schools, and we wanted to get accreditation for it. And we won. At that time, my political science classes were like walking into the past, into a museum of American government, not the American government and processes I was witnessing. I realized at that moment, which by now I'm referring to 1968, that the patriotism that FDR and JFK inspired was being snuffed out. The fabric, the bond of the America I knew and loved was disintegrating. One thing I'd like to mention right here is Mazzini, because Nick referred to Garibaldi. And Mazzini, whose autobiography at that time was in the Hunter College Reserve Room, was something I read. And he spoke about how revolution has to be indigenous. And at that time, Che Guevara was running through the jungles of Bolivia and was about to have his head blown off because he forgot the lesson, which is that what takes place has to be indigenous. And that's also a part of what took place in my life. After Robert Kennedy's assassination, Mazzini, who was really the mind, I should explain who Mazzini was. Mazzini was really the mind behind the vision of an Italian nation. After Robert Kennedy's assassination, which was when I finally got the message that at least for now there was bias, and that was stronger, that for now bias was stronger than the electoral process. Jack Newfield wrote an article in the Village Voice about his experiences with Bobby in Bed-Stuy, where Bobby, as New York's, in my opinion, last great senator, helped to create a model of hope. I remember the photo on the cover of that week's Village Voice of a sad Bobby Kennedy standing in a Bed-Stuy apartment of a black family under the picture of his brother, Martin Luther King, and Jesus. And I have since been in many apartments where these pictures hang. Jack Newfield wrote about his conversations with Bobby during his 1968 presidential campaign. Jack wrote about Bobby telling him that he envied Jack's community involvement and that that was where change would occur, and it stuck with me. Robert Kennedy had written the book To Seek a Newer World preceding his campaign, and he described how America was splitting into two societies, one black, one white. Jack Newfield wrote that Bobby was the last presidential candidate who could unite white working-class blue-collar people, something that Frank Barbaro was on the edge of. White working-class blue-collar people and working-class black citizens. They both could identify with him. And recently, Ted Kennedy and Jesse Jackson have been somewhat able to achieve this. The importance of this should not go unrecognized when violent death-threatening attacks take place between working-class white and black who have more in common than they realize. And who benefits is something people should ask themselves by that. Then the Kerner Report came out with the same conclusion as Robert Kennedy. The U.S. was becoming two separate societies, one black, one white, with their own set of laws for survival. I realized that I wanted to help build a bridge, to help bind the American community, the American soul, so that we could mend the broken pieces and have one whole society with respect for its people and respect for its land. In 1971, I began my work in the Bushwick-Williamsburg Black and Latino community, and I've been working there ever since. I worked from 1971 to 1972 as a social worker with teenagers and their families, though I was barely past my own teens. I also had teenage clubs for which I organized dances and outings and was able to work with them individually. I worked in the community to the wee hours of the morning. In my college years, I, along with many, since toddlers and preschoolers, it's been very rewarding, especially since I became a father 5 months ago to Suzanne Elise. I've been working with children and families to provide a program for children based on the discoveries of stage-to-stage development by Piaget, using developmental play and support for families. Parents are qualified who are working, looking for work, or going to school. And recently I began working with teenage parents, thanks to New York State funding, so there won't be dropouts from school on on a basis that is just totally unfair and cruel. I had an incredible experience yesterday, which kind of focused for me that what I'm doing today here is important, because I've shifted my whole life because of my 60s experiences. I would have been a lawyer, I would have been active in politics, but I felt that you have to work on a grassroots level when the nation was split into pieces. And yesterday I placed a child in a family daycare home, and I realized as I was talking to the mother that I had known her as a daycare child. And it was shocking, and the years came flooding through me. And I remembered her as a 6-year-old. And we hugged, and she couldn't remember me, but she said something that was just so beautiful. She said, I can't remember as I described what I looked like back then, but I can remember your voice, and it was a kindly voice. And seeing her as a child, that really meant a lot to me. And then I went downstairs, and a housing truck came by. This was in a housing project in Williamsburg. And two of the people stopped, and both of them I've seen recently. And one of them stopped and said to these two brothers, one said, your name is Richard, isn't it? And I said, yes. And the other said, Jesus. And I remembered something that I was going to talk to here that I was a little, it's so long ago. And I remembered that my first nickname in the community was Jesus. And I remembered, and I realized finally what it really meant. And it was that I lived with people, I drank with people, I smoked with people. I was anti-heroin and spoke about that, but I was non-judgmental. And at a certain point, I no longer drank, and I no longer smoked. I saw death before me, and in the face of death, I realized that for myself, I could not, in our society, even think of indulging in something for positive reasons when there's so much abuse of it in a society that doesn't understand, that just swallows everything up, whether it's vegetables or whether it's trees or whether it's, we're just a Baroque society in a certain level. And witnessing death, I moved away from that, but still, I lived a life that was non-judgmental, and it all came back, and my early youth was before me. And I want to share with you a couple of anecdotes from that period so you can get a sense of what I was trying to do. There was a young woman who was in high school, and this is about 1970, and I was just out of college myself. And she came to me, she was in one of my clubs, the Latin Dolls. I had a group, the Latin Dolls, the Primettes, the Mad Hammers, the Destinations. Some of these groups were also singing groups, and I tried to help them to get music contracts. And Josephine Rodriguez came to me one day and said, I can't take school anymore. And she was in high school. She was Clara Barton High School. And she was thinking of becoming a secretary. And she said, the dean called me a whore. And she said, I'm on drugs. And the first thing I did with some consultation was I took her to a doctor, and they did tests on her. And of course the tests came out negative. And then I confronted the principal, something I've wanted to do my whole life. Ironically, now I'm the borough chair of the daycare directors in the union, which is the same union as public school principals. And I confronted